Hello, Ian. It's great that you join us here for our Meet the Research and Meet the Researcher video series. And yes, welcome to the video series.
Oh, thank you for the opportunity.
So to start with, what we're trying to do is to give our viewers an idea of who are the people behind the research. So I would like to just ask you in general, who is Professor Ian Thomson?
Okay, so Professor Ian Thomson is quite old now, so this may take a little while in terms of a little bit of the story. So yes, I've been a researcher looking at accounting and sustainability in various forms for about 30 years now. So I started academia in 1990, which was before sustainability was really sort of fashionable and that well known. Prior to that, I was actually an accountant. I was working in the National Health Service in Scotland, and then BBC Scotland was my kind of final job. And while it was enjoyable being an accountant, I also had it's not boring is the wrong word. It's repetitive, and it didn't really sit that well with me. And I'd always had an interest or an activism all the way through from, for instance, I was at school, things to do with particularly interesting things to do with music and racism. There was an anti-Nazi league and Rock Against Racism, which blended two things together. And then when I left, I was involved in the union movement, but also there was lots of campaigning going on, because where I lived in Edinburgh, there was a power station that was actually being built. So it was kind of nuclear power, CND, that got me involved with environmental activists, with Friends of the Earth, various Wildlife Fund for Nature. I ended up being on the board for Friends of the Earth Scotland for a time, mainly because all these activists really like accountants. They're always needing somebody to do the books. But the other thing which I was involved in was actually sort of costing some of the things. So a lot of activists, that's a really good idea, but you can't, it's too expensive. Mm-hmm. And that always annoyed me, because certainly my experience...
So that was the main counter-argument against sustainability at the time, like it's too expensive to implement.
It was too expensive, too much trouble, and we had to change so many things, and it was too expensive. And that always annoys me when I hear somebody say it's too expensive, because you then say, have you done the sums? And they wouldn't have actually done the sums. And so one of the things I started doing was doing the sums for these things and trying to work out costs, rough estimates, and finding that most of the things were orders of magnitude wrong, and sometimes in the wrong direction. And I think an example of that, people might be familiar, is the Stern report on climate change, where everyone said it's going to cost so much and it's like impossible to do it. Stern sat down, did the sums, a lot of sums, and said, yes, it is going to be a lot, but actually it's you got the sign wrong. It's actually going to save us money, because if we don't do it, the costs are going to go up. And so I sort of started almost doing environmental accounting and social accounting by default. Obviously it helped because I was working in the health service at the time, so some of that was actually part of the kind of the day job. Yeah. And so that was it. And then it's a strange story. I kind of got invited to this little lunch by the producers in BBC Scotland, and they said, how would you like to be finance director? And I'm sort of going, well, wouldn't everyone? And they said, okay. And then I went home, and I was feeling quite excited, a little bit excited. And then when I got home, I was less excited. And I'm suddenly thinking, well, this is it. You're coming up to your 29. It looks like you're going to be finance director of a really cool organisation. BBC is a cool organisation. You really should be excited. You really should be a bit I got the training to work the NextGen day, looked at the papers the day on a Friday when all the jobs used to be in the papers, and there was a lecturing job at the local polytechnic, and I thought, oh, I fancy that. and that was largely it. So I basically went in, I applied for the job, and then about a month later, was going in to give my kind of first lecture. And then lucky I met some really interesting people who were doing, it wasn't a research institution, but people who were interested in doing sort of like research. Couple of kind of seminars later, I moved to cover maternity leave to Heriot-Watt University, and then that was it. Started sort of like research. But slightly different, I think, in terms of research, because I didn't have a PhD, I was a professionally trained accountant. So I actually started off research long before I knew what research was, sort of like helping people out. So largely sort of self-trained in a way, but also tend to be problem-focused, which tied in a lot of kind of interest. And over time, I kept working with Friends of Air Scotland, with WWF, and then gradually sort of evolved into actually sort of research. But from the very beginning, it was very much about social and environmental issues. At the time, it was more environmental issues because that was a bigger kind of priority. I think that was kind of missing. Met some people with the Centre for Social Environmental Accounting Research before the Centre for Social Environmental Research formed. So it was there very much in the beginning, and I covered in university in Dundee, a summer school, wonderful summer school, and then I've kind of worked with that community ever since then. And then a few years ago, I was on the council looking at education, and then I was elected the convener of the council. So lucky to be involved in that. What's a really, really important community of practice. A really kind of innovative, and lots of people who are now regarded as friends as well as colleagues from across the world, from far away as Brazil, China, Africa, you name it. There's not a country where they don't have contacts or colleagues.
Yeah. Mm. I can only recommend to have a look, for our viewers to have a look at the CSEAR website, which we can link in the comments. Yeah. It is a great community.
We have some great conferences around the world as well, and they're not just academic conferences. Every single one we have a practitioner focus in them, and we've always had. I think the other thing which ties into some of the research that a lot of us do is about research to make a difference.
Yeah.
So we're very welcoming. We work with most of the professional accountancy bodies. We've had people from investment houses or from across there, and we have them across the world. So there's a great program of workshops, and always happy to share our work with others and to learn from other people as well who are working in the field.
Yeah. I can only recommend to check it out. I have been at some of conferences in St. Andrews, and it's a great place to exchange views and to learn more about research.
Absolutely.
Which brings us to our next segment about the research. So, can you briefly talk about the research paper that we are discussing today, like how it started and what basically set off your curiosity in the topic?
Yes. So the paper they were talking about, is ash versus BAT, so Action of Smoking and Health Against British American Tobacco. It's a very rich paper. It's got there's a little bit of setup to actually get to that paper. I mean, effectively, the reality was it was actually the two colleagues, Shona Russell, who's an ex-PhD, and Colin Day, who's been a kind of a friend and a kind of a co-writer, and co-inspired each other's work for for a long period of time, sparking up each other. We're effectively sitting in a pub at a CSEAR conference in St Andrews, and we were sort of, Colin's an ex-smoker, and he wasn't going out, and we remarked upon how so quickly smoking stopped in public places.
Yeah.
And which
this was just after the smoking ban, or
just after the smoking ban. And we'd been having a discussion about how change didn't happen and how change was, and it's just one of these things that we're just talking. So they went, wait a minute, a major change has happened. A massive change has happened almost overnight in a country, Scotland, who were famous for bad health, smoking, top of the league in heart attacks for combining smoking and drinking. Suddenly, overnight, smoking in pubs and restaurants just went. And it then became almost like cultural acceptance. And we're just sort of like sitting talking and going, well, change does happen. But not only that, it happened in a really contested area. You know, tobacco companies are not like, oh, well, we're just going to give up all of our things. And so we suddenly thought, wonder how that happened. How did that happen? How did that, because the discussion had been largely about how change didn't happen, how hard it was to change things. And so that then got us thinking about, that is interesting. How did that happen? And was there a role for environmental accounting in there? And it tied on, but previously I'd done some work with a PhD student, Georgios Georgakopoulos, on salmon farming, where we'd actually looked at again, we picked it because it was a highly contentious issue. And then we looked at the way in which salmon, for the conflict over salmon farming, which is it's a fascinating topic, because it's at once environmentally damaging, and then it's also potentially environmentally regenerative. And in terms of people need to eat, it's a better source of food than meat, and the ocean fisheries are depleting. Yeah, it has to be in a prestigious area, because salmon need good, clean environment to exist. And so we developed this of an arena conflict there, where we actually looked at as a conflict, and then we looked for the role of accounting and evidence within that conflict. And
so you already just mentioned the concept of arena conflict. What does that mean?
So the arena it actually comes from it's a German from a German, so you'd be pleased to know, Christoph. It's a guy Wren, and he was looking at risk debates, political debates on nuclear power and genetically modified food in the introduction of it, and in terms of people there. And so what it does is it's quite simple. It basically looks at these events as kind of like as conflicts. And so you then break it down and say, well, who are the players in a conflict? And the arena is very similar to like a football ground. So you've got two sides. And you've got two sides who are fighting over something. You have their supporters, their stakeholders. It's covered. There's a rule enforcer. Okay, there's a set of kind of rule enforcers. There's media, which then communicates what's happening at the time to wider stuff. There's the public, and then there's also the political institutions that's there. So what it does is it just gives you a framing to actually, when you look at something, to then say, well, what are the different dynamics? So it's a collective engagement. It's not just two parties. A lot of these things in accounting said, okay, we have the company, then we have the investors, or we have the company and the consumers. We have a very simple set of relationships, whereas the arena allows us to then say, any conflict is going to have a political dimension to it. There's going to be rule enforcers, there's going to be regulations, there's going to be governance. There's going to be...
It's also... like the way I understand it in your paper is that it's not this kind of star shape, like that you often have with stakeholder analysis, where you have the company in the middle and then you have a star to the different stakeholders. But there's actually, in the arena, stakeholders engage as well.
Yeah. I think a better image is something like a courtroom, almost. Yeah. If you think about a court where you've got the jury, you've got the lawyers arguing, you have the judge, but then you also have the authority of the judge, the authority of the court, the laws and the regulations which form the basis of the case. And so it's a little bit like that. And you've also got some of it's recorded by, press, and then you've got the public can actually be present and observe, and other ones there. And then you have all of the different witnesses, the expert witnesses arguing both different kind of ideas. Although most conflicts are not as rational as a court, but as a model, it's there. And there's that means there's many more different relationships and engagements and opportunities for conversations to actually to look at. And it's often the issue which is at the centre. And that's a big thing that I find it's really useful, is that a lot of this debate, we look at a company and a company's relationship elsewhere, whereas an arena looks at the issue or the risks or the conflicts, and then builds around those conflicts.
And then the conflict and the issue that you are talking about, which is basically largely the effect of smoking. Is there one arena, or did you discover several arenas?
No, what we did was, when we started to, as I said, started from a simple idea, but like most simple ideas, they become, to try and evidence and find out, they become very complicated. And what we did was we then started to look at the different arenas. We found there was many. I can't remember exactly how many, but it was over at least over 20 different arenas that were related. And you had things like the smoking in public places. So that was where we started from. But actually, when we started to look at that arena, we found that there were other ones to do with, there's the health and safety of the people who work in it. There's the constitution, the chemical constitution of the cigarettes themselves, which cause the harm. And then you've got the addiction of the nicotine, and you then go into psychological addiction, you then go into physical health, you then move into taxation, you then move into regulation enforcement, different types of disease, and again, as it was wonderful, as it was really fascinating when you unfold it, you suddenly realize that some diseases, so things like amputation, people lose limbs, is to do with smoking. And then it's related to child health, maternal health. So there was a huge range of different ones related to taxation, smuggling, regulations, voluntary codes, and so it was really interesting the way in which these things were sort of developed over time. And if you were then to look at, for example, British American Tobacco, you could start to understand their social responsibility, their accounting and accountability was actually largely formed by these conflicts with which it was actually sort of dealing with in particular thing. The other interesting thing about this was the whole dispute between ASH and BAT largely kicked off when BAT produced their first corporate social responsibility report, which may claim they were socially responsible. And that, rather than being a legitimating device, a way to calm down opposition, actually triggered what we studied was we studied an 11-year conflict over that period. So we took that longer time period to look at how it was evolving, looking at particularly interested in the use of accounting-like devices and evidence and different types of reports that form part of this conflict, the dynamics within the conflict.
And in this situation where we have a lot of different arenas, how did ASH actually become successful? Because it sounds like there's a lot of different conflicts going on with different arenas. and different people fighting in different arenas for different things. So, for example, some are fighting to change taxation, some are fighting to improve or reduce the flammability, just things like house fires. So how did all of this kind of complex, decentralized portfolio of arenas, so to speak, change into the action that you observed in the pub in St Andrews?
We're looking at it with hindsight. We deliberately didn't go and talk to anyone at ASH for the purposes of this one, because we were really interested in the power of the report. Yeah. And once the report's been produced, the intention behind it is actually lost, because this was a kind of a global thing. So we're just interested at the sort of like the documents and the reports that were actually sort of present, because we felt that's the way most people are going to experience this debate. So we wanted to try and experience it as an account user, not as people being actually involved in the process. So there's a few things that came out. One was I think the systemic understanding of smoking that ASH had, that they were maybe, you could argue, their single issue in that they're interested in reducing the health effects of tobacco production and consumption, but they also understood it as a interconnected set of problems and looked at a holistic sense. So I think they had a big picture of all of the different areas that they needed to address, and they're also part of a kind of a global network as well. Although they're very small, they're a very small organisation. So they were very much, they're a kind of a persistent over time, and they were able to look at what was actually happening and then target their efforts and largely come up with provoke a response, problematize something that's actually going on. They would then, BAT would effectively counter it in some way, and then they would persist with it. And so there was a persistence over a period of time. But they were able to reshape where they attacked it. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, crudely speaking, the BAT's large position was, we deal with adults. Adults have a right to choose, and we are not breaking any law. Okay? Yeah. So ASH would, in situations, say, well, here's laws that you are breaking, so you're not complying with it. Then there's also things like, well, some of the laws were problematic. Some of the laws weren't really laws; they were voluntary codes. Yeah. And so saying, well, the code isn't very good. So they switched the point of attack, as it were, from the company to the law, which they were relying upon to do it.
So and they basically understood the different arenas and connected them in the report, and when they tried to move it forward, they changed their focus from one arena to the other to get kind of a holistic
Absolutely. And they were very good at building coalitions as well, and I think that was one thing you actually saw. So we actually felt that they used a lot of their reports to combine these arenas together to build coalition. And we saw that certainly their approach was about coalition building as well, and evidence-based. I think that was the other thing. They're a science-based advocacy group. They've got connections with the medical profession. They're scientific in their approach. They also brought in economic arguments as well as kind of science. So they used evidence, but what they did was they amplified that evidence through media, activism, and stunts, which were very powerful at getting the message across. So like we talk about they had BAT's footprint. So they talked about their footprint on BAT. Were talking about their footprint in terms of creating, kind of producing tobacco in a less environmentally friendly way. What they did was their footprint. So they actually got shoes from people who died, and sort of like tied little name tags to the person who was dead. And then on the run up to the AGM, they had all these empty shoes children's shoes, adult shoes there. And they're saying, well, that's also your footprint, all these dead people. And then they did that at the AGM. They were also kind of they bought shares, and so they were in the shareholders' meetings, and they used these events to amplify it. But then they also had these evidence-based stuff that was actually so it was entwined with their activism.
It's already like just in this example, two very different arenas. Like the AGM and buying shares is a completely different arena compared to the activism one. So to maybe jump slightly and briefly into the nitty-gritty part. So how did you do that research? What did you do to get that information and to, in the end, come up with these results?
Well, the original starting point, we it was again, we look back with amazement about how naive we were about how we went about this project. So we started off. We thought, we'll go back to the first CSR report by BAT, and then the BA Ash's mirror image of it. So they basically said, here's our report, and then Ash produced an alternative one. So we thought that's it. So we thought we'll look at that, and then gradually as we sort of like were going through the different documents, we discovered there was hundreds of documents. This whole range of different things. So we started off with this conflict, and then what we did was we largely looked. We went onto both of their web pages, which they were very good at documenting. The press releases, all of the reports. And Ash has a wonderful webpage of resources, reports, news briefings, toolkits, and all these different things. So we gradually, we started off with a relatively smaller sample of these things, and then we started to look at what was actually going on. And then we discovered actually, well, the problem was making a sample was part of the problem, because we were then picking. We were going in, and dangers of, I suppose, confirmation bias that were there. Yeah. So we just gradually moved to the thing. Well, we need to just basically look at everything that's on the webpage, all of the documents that were actually there. But this time we were analysing them in terms of conflicts and arenas. So we were able then to look at. So we used we were able to use the evidence to read in the reports to actually to look at what were the kind of themes which were emerging. And this was alongside the arena model, where we're looking at different stakeholders and press reports and tools and natures of engagement that were actually there. So I mean, that sounds quite organised, but largely what happened was, in my kind of kitchen table for quite a few weeks over the summer period, I just had like sheets and sheets of flip chart paper all over the place, and basically we'd like open a document up, and then you read it and you go, okay, I'm seeing product liability here, I'm seeing tax, I'm seeing this, I'm seeing specific reference to there, I'm seeing reference to other types of organisations that are actually co-authorship to the report. So where the kind of coalition that's actually sort of building, and gradually just did a mind map, basically a big mind map of all that was actually seen from all of these reports, these individual reports, and looking for where a lot was happening. But then it became important also to look at the timing. The timing was kind of like critical, because often it was a reaction to. None of these reports lacked purpose. They all had a purpose in them. So we're able to then to look at it. And after we'd done some of that, we gradually started to develop a little bit theorizing about the different types of engagement. So we had one which we called like breach reports. So we could see a lot of them that were breach reports that were about compliance. So they were about working within existing systems. Then there was other types of ones which we kind of called sort of partisan, so a little bit like the partisan guerrilla type thing, where they were looking at things, they were seeing a problem, they didn't want to didn't have the muscle to overpower BAT, so then they would then go and say, well, actually, we need to change that code, we need to change a little piece of regulation, the wording, how it's interpreted. And so we had ones which were about there. So kind of reforming. And then we had other ones which were much more like contra, much stronger, attacking principles of regulation, and also sort of social acceptability. So really trying to kind of change kind of like mindsets. Now we had another one which turned out to be hypothetical, which is dialogics, about people sitting down, engaging in non-conflictual debate to come up with certain things. We didn't find any of that. In fact, we found evidence to say on both sides we're not going to do that. Basically they're just going, well, there's no point, there's no point engaging with them. And things like British American Tobacco just going, they're nut jobs. Why would we deal with nut jobs who want to kill us? We're not going to engage.
Kill their business model rather than kill the people.
Absolutely, and it was interesting that it was such a polarized fight, which is slightly different from the salmon farming, where actually the engagement, they didn't get such a clean solution, but they actually started to get tripartite discourse that was actually going on. And it still never resolved the salmon farming debate. It's still ongoing, but largely it's become neutralized, and it's a much more, I think, whereas the tobacco, it almost needed these big symbolic kind of changes. But it was very much again, you can start to see that the way there was, both sides were engaging in little bits of politics and rhetoric, but the difference was that there was a stronger. Both of them made use of accounting like evidence and economics to bolster their shape. So there was very much a, sort of evidence-based debate. However, the self-interest and the motivation and vested interest were very much there, and certainly the problem that certainly the tobacco industry has is, their covert tactics. As the history of the tobacco sector, in their tactics, the way in which they use things, actually formed a model for a lot of the anti-climate change protests as well. Some of the food things. So,
I think you're already moving over to kind of the next section. So our next section is basically outlook, and you mentioned with tobacco the basically. I know that it's not really a topic of the past. It's still very much ongoing. If we look at the UK, we might get the idea that it's a battle that was won by ash. But I think the picture is different globally.
Oh, and it's shifted to
however,
well. It's.
I just wanted to slightly lead over to what do you think are the next key challenges? So if you're looking at the next generation, and also with the perspective of how the next generation can get involved in these issues, what would you see as the next big challenges for the next generation?
I think to me that the one thing I think that's an important implication from this is that the fact that you don't need to rely on the corporation to tell you what's going on about the corporation. So I think what we refer to as, and we kind of refer to it and there is external accounting, is that people outside the organisation have the power and the legitimacy and the capacity to produce meaningful accounts of what an organisation is doing. So you mentioned the sort of star shape where you've got the company in the middle, disseminating the information that it chooses and thinks people want to have. Whereas what this paper and some other ones we did actually demonstrated the ability, particularly to problematize what's going on in an organisation through some mobilising lots of existing technology. So looking at breaches of the law, being able to actually to create platforms, and I think certainly moving on to work I did with kind of Mercy, Denado, and so Niger Delta, where it's very clear the power of NGO platforms to actually to consolidate these different accounts, to be able to to communicate these different things. So I think that,
and then these accounts, when you mention the word accounts, I think we don't need to think of these annual account statement type tables, but it can be things like videos, it can be things like pictures, it can be using your pen as a camera, like the Word, and even Twitter or messages.
And assembling evidence from other sources as well. So if you can, so press releases, court cases, pulling out sort of evidence that has actually been there. So there's lots of sources. I mean, right now we've got many sources, and it's the way in which, I mean, we often think of accountants as, following procedures, but actually they assemble evidence from all sorts of different sources and pull it together to tell a kind of a compelling narrative of what either they have to tell, which is due to regulation, or the stories that they want to tell. And so it's about this. You're right. Is this idea where we can actually, as part of the account, we can look at the chemical. If you want, you can actually capture the air coming out of a factory and analyze it yourself and produce an account of the pollution. Compare that to what the company's producing, and it's the comparison between the two of them. And I think there's lots of potential now for. As I've been playing around the idea of citizen accountability and citizen audit, that people as individuals now have the power to account through a picture, through their experiences, through they have a product, and it might be something like a suit jacket, and you discover that suddenly it's got a big needle sticking in it. It's there's glass in your product, so you can previously, what would you do? It's very difficult to do that. You just take a picture, post it up, social media, and we're certainly as we're technology is now able to assemble and analyze these different things. You tag it. Geographic information systems. You just start popping stuff on. You can start to look at these different things. Tobacco.
So for the next generation, we the technology provides the power to create also globally an account of a company's behavior. And I think in the next step, it also through the internet provides the chance to connect the different arenas in a very, very powerful and not resource intensive way.
Absolutely.
Would that be correct?
Absolutely. If you think about now, something like tobacco. Now, tobacco's got a very, kind of like globally dispersed supply chain, where they actually grow tobacco. And previously, it would be very difficult to get any information. Whereas now you can just, I'm quite sure we could do an experiment and we just go, we post to social media, anyone got a picture of something, a tobacco company and the herbicides they're using in the production. Now I would reckon within about a day, you would have pictures of the chemicals and how they're being used, and maybe videos and how they're actually being used on a webpage.
Like there would be the whole issue of verifying it, but I do see.
One of the flip sides is as well. Yeah. How do we know that that's true? And I think there is that issue there, and it's something that needs to be balanced with the ability to get this accountability and this evidence, But it's always going to be edited. It's always going to be curated. There's always going to be ideology and purpose that underpins these different things. And we have assurance mechanisms. They're not perfect in any way, but we have systems in place. We don't have systems in place for these other things. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're not powerful. They're not truthful, but how do we rely on it? So we're not solving the problem. We're shifting the problem
to briefly summarize in terms of outlook, if I understand you correctly, it's the outlook would be that we are moving as a society, not necessarily as the business world, but as a society, we are moving away from the reliance on a single source of reporting, like to rely on the company for reporting, but the society moves away from that and includes shadow accounts that can encompass a large amount of information along the supply chain.
Absolutely. And I think the one thing I'd say about ASH was I think it's very difficult to accuse them of misleading, of not having an evidential base. They were very careful about protecting that bit there. And it's to me, there is a really good example of I suppose intelligent counter-accounting. You know, it did play with passions and emotions and all that sort of thing. But at the core was, you know, there's a science based now, and again, you can that opens up a whole lot of other things. But they were evidence-based engagement that was premised on legitimate scientific theories.
All right, thank you very much. Like, I could talk to you about this for hours, as you know, but thank you very much for discussing with us the paper, and we will link it in the commentary. So to our viewers, I can only recommend to have a look at this paper. It's a great way of looking into stakeholder relations and also into conflicts which occur or can occur between companies and stakeholders. Thank you very much, Ian.
No, thank you, Christoph. Okay, bye.